Hi everyone, welcome back to another installment of Simply Comms by Balance Blender. I'm Aimee Dubreuil, comms leader, creative producer, and founder of Cultureize. This week we're going to have a look at communication channels and how to choose the best channel to reach your audience. There are countless channels out there these days, and it can be hard to decide which is the best one to convey our message. Even for those of us who work in the field and who are constantly keeping track of these new developments, it can be difficult. It just is moving so fast, and audiences are fragmented. They hang out in multiple places. With so much fragmentation, how is it that we can keep up as they hop and hop from one place to another? There are a couple of classic rules in choosing your communication channels that still apply today. So let's have a look at those now. The easiest way to decide on your communication channels is simply to figure out where your audience is hanging out most of the time. What are their primary sources of information? And how does your message fit into that picture? When we're communicating remotely, we're asking people for their time and attention in their own space. And those are two of the most precious resources that we have these days. If you want that message to land, think about that environment they're in. If you were in their shoes, what would you want to receive? What would you be willing to listen to, and what would grab your attention? We've spoken before about what's the biggest mistake people make when communicating, and that's thinking too much about what they want to say and not why they want to say it. And when we think about our communication channels, this really comes into play. Your selection of communication channel depends entirely on what it is you're trying to achieve. There are loads of marketing gurus out there who can give you a cookie-cutter model for developing a big Instagram following or growing your email list. But if that doesn't translate into sales, because that's your main goal, or if it doesn't translate into being able to reach leaders of top companies with your message or new product, it's not going to work either. Some of those leaders may very well be hanging out on Instagram in their spare time, but they're more likely to be consuming a message around business in something like the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal or Harvard Business Review, LinkedIn as well, some of the thought leadership articles. That may be a bit of a generalization, but the point is it's worth taking a look at where your audience spends their time, what sort of information sources they're consuming, and be sure to place yourself there. Another rule is to match the medium to the message that you have to convey. There are all sorts of types of communication channels out there, and there are also a lot of groupings. I like to group them into three main areas. The first one being broadcast, the second, what I call social, and the third, personal. We're going to take a look at each one of those now, including when and why we would use them and some of the pros and cons to each one. Let's take broadcast first. The main feature of channels that fit into this group is that we're communicating from one to many. So the reach is really broad, and the depth won't be as in-depth as some other options. The number of people you may be trying to reach could be in the hundreds, maybe the thousands, possibly the millions. And I know some of you may argue that there is no pure form of broadcast in our world of social media, and that's absolutely true. With employee advocacy and citizen activism, it's not possible for us to simply command and control messages. Broadcast channels include things like news interviews or company-wide updates if you're talking about internal communications. And some of these can include verbal or nonverbal. That's another way to split communication channels. But nowadays, verbal and nonverbal fit into all of these buckets, whether it's broadcast, social, or personal. It's really a good idea to have a bit of both and a mix, no matter what you're doing, whether you're trying to communicate one-to-many or one-to-one. Or many-to-many. The main reason you would choose a broadcast channel where you're speaking one-to-many is to inform, possibly even to entertain. These are the usual communication objectives we have when we're trying to seed an idea amongst a large group of people. And as I said before, in that type of channel, you're not going to be able to have the space or time to go into great depth. So think very carefully about that high-level message, what we call the main point, when using a broadcast channel, and stick to language that is really accessible to a large population. The next one is social. Now, let's not get confused with social media and digital platforms, which do factor into this as various channels we can use. What I mean by social is really the mechanism by which we communicate. And in this case, it's many to many. So you're going to have a lot of people interacting. We have many different people acting as that messenger to reach a broad number of people. Two of the most common examples of this are what we're seeing in citizen activism and employee advocacy. In both cases, you have regular people like me who are considered the most trustworthy sources of information, who are sharing messages either on behalf of an organization or on behalf of an advocacy group or their own personal agenda to spark behavior change. These type of communication channels are great when we're trying to inspire action or influence. And in fact, in recent years, a lot of what we're seeing in how information is shared falls into this category. In general, we're seeing a huge shift towards this type of communication, even in more traditional organizations. And this can be a bit daunting for companies or organizations that are used to that command and control of broadcast, where they'd have something to say, channel it through news media, and the story would be out exactly in the way that they'd intended. We can't do this anymore. And there's enormous power in harvesting that energy of having influencers and people who are going to advocate on behalf of your brand or your company or your activity. At the same time, that means giving up a little bit of control, because they're going to want to put their spin on the message. So these kind of channels are great when you're trying to spark action or change amongst a large group of people and take that idea you've seeded and planted through your broadcast communication and really bring it to life. The third bucket that I like to organize channels into is personal. And what I mean by this is communication channels that are one-to-one. One-to-one channels like face-to-face meeting or phone call or video conference are great when you have really sensitive information to share or detailed information that requires a lot more time and energy to digest. Obviously, our reach is limited with one-to-one communication channels, but the impact can be enormous. So these are really good when we're looking to persuade or reassure, especially in times of change. As with the others, broadcast and social, you can use a mix of media in order to do your personal communication. It can be written, as in an email, and it can be personal, one-to-one. And the best way to get an overall message across is to use a mix. As with all of your communication, when you're thinking about what channel to use, remember to go back to your communication objective. It helps to meet your audience where they are, and also to segment your communication channels into main groups. When using broadcast, it's great if you want to be fast and get a message as far as possible. You'll use social when you're looking to get a little bit more behavior change involved and action and persuasion. And when you need to go in more depth, personal communication channels are the way to go. Choosing your communication channel is a bit of an art and a science. There's no exact way to do it. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what message you have. So play around a little, test them out, see what works, see what doesn't, and soon you'll be able to find the right mix for your business. If you want more communication tips and tricks, you can subscribe here or head over to balanceblender.com to sign up for our newsletter and read more on the blog.